So welcome to our webinar today, 5 brilliant tips to enhance your photos in Lightroom. As you know, I'm Pete DeMarco, and this is Pete van den Eynde. And today we are going to teach you about how to enhance your photos in Lightroom. Oh, this photo, by the way, Pete took this photo in Varanasi. This is his shot. I love this shot. I tried to take this shot when I went to Varanasi, but actually I got really sick and I was ready to go on the boat, and I just told the guy I can't make it. My stomach was upset, and went back into the hotel and didn't leave for 3 days.
Wow.
But anyways, I think Pete maybe took this shot around the time we met. We actually met 2 or 3 years ago in India, and I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. But first, I want to go over the agenda of what we're going to talk about today. The first thing is I want to do a little introduction about myself and Pete, and then we're going to just very briefly talk about what's Lightroom and why use it. And that reminds me, I just launched this little poll, which you can see. Whoops, I can't move that. Can you see that poll on my screen?
I see a poll, yes.
Okay. But I can't get rid of the poll. Huh. Well, this is my first time running the webinar, guys, so there might be a couple mess ups.
Otherwise, just say in the chat whether you've used Lightroom before or not. Richard says he is able to answer the poll.
Okay, but do you see the poll on people filling out the poll right now? I can't tell.
I still see the poll, yes.
Okay. So how do I remove that thing from the screen? Oh, geez. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So go ahead and answer the question of the poll. Let's see who's using Lightroom. So we're also then we'll get into Pete's 5 tips to enhance your photos in Lightroom. We also have a course offer, special offer. Pete just came out with a new Lightroom course, which we're going to share with you after his tips. Then we'll go over the Q&A, so you can ask us some questions about either the course or about using Lightroom or what Pete's sharing. And then finally, at the end, we're going to give away a few little things at the end, which I'll tell you about after. Some housekeeping things. First, this webinar will last 1 hour. During the webinar, if you have a question, you can, there's a little question icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you just click on that question tab, you can write out a question, and I'll try to answer your question while Pete is talking. But if I don't answer your question, don't worry. Pete will go through all the questions once he's finished with his little tip presentation. And also at the very end, like I said, there'll be a 15-minute Q&A. So to get started, this photo on the left, these are 2 of my photos. This one on the left is from the Taj Mahal, and it's actually where I met Pete. I took this photo right before or right after I met Pete. He was leading a workshop with Matt Brandon in India, and I just happened to bump into them there by total chance. It was really bizarre, but that was the first time Pete and I met. We have a friend in common, Matt Brandon, and we've been in touch ever since for the last 2 years or so, 2 or 3 years now, we've known each other. So about me, I really like landscape photography. I love cityscape photography, especially. I also like to do a lot of aerial photography. This picture on the right is a picture I took of Dubai using my drone. So I really love cityscape photography, travel, aerial photography, and I also enjoyed taking landscape photos as well. So before I moved to Malaysia, I was actually teaching English at a university in South Korea for about 10 years. That's me on the left there. And then I decided to quit my job and pursue photography, because while I was teaching at the university, I just fell in love with photography, and I started publishing my photos, which you can see in the top right here. This is a story I did for Thai Airlines. I also worked with CNN and a whole bunch of other sites. And then I decided to quit my job and really pursue photography and teach other photographers about photography, either through workshops or tours, or also just online as well. Now for Piet, Piet is a Belgian freelance photographer specializing in travel portraiture on off-camera flash. He's also an Adobe Lightroom certified expert, which I think this is really important because a lot of people who teach Lightroom aren't actually certified by Adobe, but Piet is, so he knows it very, very well. He's also the author of 10 books on Lightroom. He's taught thousands of students both online and in person. He's also a Fuji ambassador, which is called an ex-photographer. And one little interesting tidbit I found out about him in my research, he cycled 5,000 miles through Turkey, Iran, India, Indonesia for his Portraits of Asia photo project.
Yeah, that was when I was still in good shape, you know. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So here's a few photos of Piet's. Piet, why don't you just tell us a little bit about these?
Yeah,
photos?
this one is from Mongolia, from a workshop I did in Mongolia. And actually, I think I saw somebody in the participants who was on that workshop. So I think he can vouch for the fact that it was an unforgettable experience. And we are here up high in the mountains trying to direct the softbox onto these guys with their eagles and the horses. And this is actually a combination of two shots. It's something I do often. So I lit the first guy first and then the second guy, and then I merge these together in Photoshop. So, and then I apply the color grade in Lightroom, but we'll see more about that in the webinar today.
Awesome. How about these two?
What this is, I mean, as much as I would love to travel, I have a 5-year-old, so every once in a while I need to be home. And this is what well, the picture on the left at least is what I do when I'm home. I love urban exploring. In a way, it's also traveling. It's just traveling in time rather than geographically. And in Belgium, we have plenty of these abandoned factories and stuff. And so what I like to do is go with creative people like dancers. It could be steampunkers, but you know, very people with characteristic faces or attitudes, and I take them to these abandoned places and I just shoot them with flash, and it gives for a nice contrast, I think. And then the image on the right is another workshop, which actually I'll be posting details from the 2009 edition, like next week on my site. And this is Ethiopia, which I went to for recce last year, and which was an amazing experience for me. And also, so I'll be returning there this year with all my flashes and all my cameras and lenses, and we'll have a great time again. Really incredible people, actually the most beautiful people probably I've ever photographed in my life. So that's Ethiopia. Yeah.
Excellent. So today we are going to be talking about Lightroom, as you know, and just for anybody out there, I see there's a few people who haven't used Lightroom or maybe are not that familiar with it. Quite simply, Lightroom is like a digital darkroom for your photos. So it's photo editing software. And it's also like a digital filing cabinet where you organize your photos. Now there's kind of two main versions right now. There's a mobile version, or one you can use on your smartphone, which is called Lightroom CC. And then there's the other one, the main one, the desktop version, is called Lightroom Classic CC. And today we're going to be talking about this desktop version. And Lightroom Classic is an integral part of both my own workflow and Piet's. We use it for everything we do. It's always the first point where we start with our images. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Piet.
All right.
I can figure out how to get this screen share off. Stop share. Okay. All right.
Okay.
It's all you. And I'm going to jump over to the Q&A and chat. So if anyone has any questions in the Q&A or chat, go ahead and type stuff there while Pete is talking. So Pete, it is all you.
Are you guys seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Well, I think this, so far, this works really smoothly. I mean, I'm like worried that, you know, it's still the edgy part still has to come. But anyway, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, wherever you are. So I'll start with a disclaimer first. So we call this 5 tips because, you know, everybody needs a webinar, but depending on how you view it, you will see either one giant tip or maybe 55 small tips. I'll just try and cram as much information as possible in the next 30 or 35 minutes. And those of you who know me know that especially during webinars, I don't always follow a very linear structure just because I want to show you as much as possible. I do assure you that the actual training course, which we'll talk about at the end of the workshop or at the end of the webinar, is a lot more structured. But just so you know. Anyway, let's start with the first thing. The 80-20 rule. What do we mean by that? I think, and for image editing, that it's really a case of, you know, the 80-20 rule. It's basically the Pareto rule, which says that, for example, if you have a business, that 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers. Well, in Lightroom terms, that would mean that you can get, for me, you can get an image to 80% of its potential in 20% of your total editing time. Or put the other way around, that last 20%, which is often the difference between good and great though, might take you 80% of your total editing time. And what I try to do in my workflow is to get to that last 20% of, you know, what makes an image from good to great in as little time as possible. And that's why you'll often see me use, for example, presets, which I'll talk about later, or now more recently profiles, because that gives me a very basic but really good look really quickly, and then I can spend some more time on the finishing touches, which are local adjustments, which we'll talk about also during this webinar. So you see, basically everything I'm going to talk about is really interrelated. Now, where do I actually start? Well, that's probably important. So normally what I recommend people start with is with a couple of things. And one of those is because you have the basic panel in Lightroom, and most of the books that I've ever read say that you should start there. And I agree, but with 2 exceptions. The first exception is that I really think you should first apply your lens corrections. Now, there's a difference here with lens corrections on whether you're using DSLR versus mirrorless camera. For example, this image was, if I press on the I key, I should be able to see the information. So this is shot with the 16-35 Nikon lens back in the day when I was still using Nikon. So this is a DSLR, digital SLR image. So what I really want is for this to be nice and straight. So I'll head over to the lens corrections panel, and in this kind of image, I have to manually set this. You know, Lightroom doesn't do it automatically. But the reason I like to do this is that it not only will correct the perspective and the geometric distortion of the lens, but quite often it will also take care of the vignetting. Like, for example, as you can see, the corners in the uncorrected image are quite dark. When they are corrected, they are a lot brighter. So if I wouldn't do this at first, I might overcorrect the image brightness in the basic panel because I think I want to brighten the corners a little bit more, right? So this gives me a better starting point. That's one thing. What I also will do is I will remove the chromatic aberration. Now, this image doesn't really suffer from that, but for example, this image here, has a lot of chromatic aberration. It's those green fringes that you'll see towards the in high contrast situations, like this is backlit. And by the way, checking this here doesn't even really take away the chromatic aberration. So I've got a kind of a tip within the tip for you. If ever you have a situation like this where checking remove chromatic aberration doesn't help you, you can do two things. You can either go into the manual tab and then click on the eyedropper here and click on that offensive green fringe, and sometimes that improves it. If that still doesn't help, you're not out of luck, because then you still have, and I guess you guys following this webinar are probably the 0.001% of Lightroom users who have even ever heard of this slider. Because I want to throw in here something for everybody. You know, I want to have some basic tips, but I also want to have some more advanced tips. So if you can't get rid of the this fringe, then use the defringe slider in the adjustment brush, and we'll get to the adjustment brush later. And you can paint on that offensive fringe, and normally that should take it away. So that's like a localized control when the global controls don't work. So that's just a little advanced tip for you. Anyway, back to the where I was with the lens corrections. Now, for example, I told you that this is for if you have a DSLR. If you have a mirrorless camera, then what you will see is, if you go to the lens corrections, that normally, or at least what you should see, is a message like this here: built-in lens profile applied. So in this case, for most mirrorless cameras, the information on how to correct the problems of your lens, like the distortion, the vignetting, the chromatic aberration, is stored in the raw file. It's actually given to Adobe by the camera or lens manufacturer. And so if I click on this little eye here, then this will tell me that this raw file contains a built-in lens profile for correcting distortion, chromatic aberration, and vignetting. It's not always the three it corrects, but in this case, it corrects all three. So this is a very good profile. So this means that as a mirrorless user, you don't have to worry about this because it's already done for you. On the downside, this also means that you cannot really see how much of your lens performance is optical versus how much of it is actually done after the fact in the software. So you might really have a really crappy lens, for so to speak, and everything's corrected in post. But I just say, as long as it looks good, who cares, right? Now, anyway, so that's about, you know, the starting thing. So the first thing I recommend you do beforehand is actually to check that, and especially if you're on a DSLR. And what I would also recommend is that you turn this into a preset. So you don't want to spend your time each and every time you've imported images to check these two things. So you can actually do two things. You can either hold down the Option or the Alt key and click on the reset button, and the reset button will change to set default. And so what this will do is, if you click on it, that from now on, every image taken with this particular camera that is imported will automatically get these two settings applied to it. So the idea is, if you have multiple cameras, you would repeat this procedure for those cameras, and then from now on, this would be your new default. So this also means that, for example, suppose you want your images to look a bit more contrasty right from the bat, right? So you could increase the contrast, right? And then Option click and set default. So what this does is, anything that you changed from the default values will now be considered the new default values for this particular camera. So that's one thing, that's changing the default. Another slightly less drastic thing is that you can just you know, apply whatever you want to be applied to this image. And then in the presets tab, and we'll get to that later again, but in the presets tab, you click on the plus icon, you choose create preset, and then you simply check what needs to be checked. In this case, the lens profile corrections and the chromatic aberration, because that corresponds to those two checkboxes. And so you could call this my lens correction preset, right? And you click on, let me put this in a new folder so that I can quickly find it, or in a new group, and I'll call this demo webinar, and I'll click create here and create here. And what this should do is create a new folder here, hopefully, demo webinar somewhere. But I do, as you see, I have too many presets. That happens when you create your own presets, that you have a lot of stuff that you're trying out and all. So
Pete, I have a couple questions for you when you're ready.
Yeah, so let me just look for, I'm not gonna spend 20 minutes browsing through where they actually are, but what I wanted to say is that, oh, there they are, there it is, here. So what I can do then, and then I'll answer the questions, I can now right click on this newly created preset and choose apply on import. And what that will do is the next time I import images with the import dialog, right? Then I will, this will be applied automatically over here. So this means that it's just going to be by default, these checkboxes are going to be checked. And you can pretty much put anything you want applied to your images in what I call an import preset, and that'll save you a lot of time later on. And the difference with the previous is that this will apply to all your images, regardless of the camera brand. Now, for example, if you import an image from a mirrorless camera, it will check the checkboxes, but it won't make a difference. So anyway, let's hear those questions.
First question is from Brian. He asks, on the lens correction, I've experienced situations where the automatic on mirrorless, i.e. Fuji 10-24, doesn't quite do the job. Is there a way to tweak the automatic lens correction?
Well, in that case, you could experiment if the you have this distortion slider here, but you cannot really change this. So the only way that I know to change anything would be in the manual tab, because what this one does here, this changes, this amount slider here changes the amount of the actual automatic correction. But you could go into the manual. This is an image from a mirrorless camera. This is from my GFX, but it's the same principle. So in here, I can correct the distortion, but this is your typical pincushion versus what's the other, barrel distortion. So this is a very linear distortion. So if you have complex distortions, you can't really correct them with this. But for basic stuff, you can do this.
Peter asks, where do I find the default option?
How do you mean the default option, Peter? It's in the lens corrections tab here, in which is under your detail panel. And in Lightroom Classic, these two got separated. So lens corrections and transform are two separate panels. In the older Lightrooms, this was one global panel here, right? Oh, by the way, another small tip, it's just that it's a really handy one if you're working on a small screen. Like for example, normally I'm working on this is my iMac, but I set it to a lower resolution for the webinar. So basically it behaves like a small screen. And with all these panels open, I have to scroll a lot. So what you can do is if you right click on any of the panels and you can enter solo mode. And what this does is it will basically it will only leave one panel open at a time. So if I open the lens corrections panel, for example, basic closes. If I open the tone curve, the lens correction panel closes. So you have a lot less scrolling to do this way. And this is ideal for when you're working on laptops, for example. If you have like an iMac with a gigantic screen resolution, then I generally leave this off because then I just have everything open and I can just jump to the different panels all in one go. But it's something that a lot of people don't know, and it's a big time saver again. So any more questions or?
No, that's all for now.
All right. Okay. Well, let's go back to so that was the one thing. There's another thing I want to quickly talk to you about, and that's the importance of, again, as a starting point before we actually start editing the images, that's the importance of camera matching profiles. So for example, and this is especially this is a new thing also in Lightroom, a relatively new thing. So you may or you may not know that you can actually, in your camera, you can choose specific profiles. Fuji calls them film simulations. Nikon calls them, I think it calls them picture controls. Canon calls them picture styles, or vice versa. So anyway, it's the settings you can enter in the camera, and they directly apply to the JPEGs that you shoot, but they also apply to the preview you see on your LCD screen. So the thing is, for example, with the Fuji, you can set up a Fuji to shoot in across, which is a black and white film simulation. The problem is, if you shoot across, you will see this on your LCD screen. But if you open up your raw image in Lightroom, Lightroom doesn't know about the simulation you shot your image with. So it will show you this, right? The default color image, which by default has the Adobe color profile attached to it. So what you can do is, and especially if you like your image, right, out of the gate, to look as closely as to resemble your LCD, back of the LCD image, as closely as possible, what you should do is go to the top of the basic panel in the new Lightroom Classic, that is, and click on these four rectangles here, and then go to what is called the camera matching profiles. And this is Adobe reconstructing basically those looks that you can set in your camera for your JPEGs, and here you can apply them to your RAW files. So for example, if I apply that across profile to my image here, then you can see that this will now resemble the JPEG almost perfectly. So it has the same look and feel of the JPEG, it has the same contrast, the same whatever, but the big difference is that this is a RAW. So with all the added, leeway in terms of processing that a RAW file offers. And so that's why I recommend that people do this first. First lens corrections, and then set your profile to whatever you're expecting to see on your camera. For example, I shoot a lot with my camera on Pro Next standards. So if I choose this, well, then at least I'll get to look closer to what I was expecting based on the LCD of my camera. If you don't care about the default look, then you might as well leave it at Adobe Color. But it's just that, for some people, this can be important. Okay.
Pete,
so yeah.
Question from Rika. She asks, can I do that to camera profile color to JPEGs if I haven't shot RAW?
No, because the JPEGs already have that profile applied to them. And so you cannot, I mean, the creative profiles you cannot change on the JPEG. They're also camera specific. For example, the list I just showed you here is what you see here is because I'm working on a Fuji file. If I was working on a Nikon file, let me quickly grab a Nikon file here from, for example, this here, you'll see that I get a different set of options, right? So the options you see here are dependent on your camera. However, what you can do on a JPEG, and I'll hopefully touch on that later, is that you can use the creative profiles, which are a new thing and which is something I'm super excited about. Anyway, let's move on with what I wanted to tell you. And this is basically, so here, so after, you know, having set your camera, the lens corrections up, so let me do that. It doesn't do a lot in this case, but it's still important to do so. And in this case, I'm not going to bother about the profile because I'm going to change the look anyway. But then it's time to start with the basic panel. And I think a really important tip is, and this goes a bit against my own, you know, work as a teacher, but I'd say for those of you starting out with Lightroom, there's a lot to be said for the auto button. It used to be bad. I mean, it used to be like 50% okay, 50% really off the charts. Now I'd say it's more like 90-10. And the reason is that it also uses machine learning. So they have fed Lightroom thousands upon thousands of images, and it's learned from that. And so it's able to basically see, for example, backlit scenes, and it knows what kind of corrections it needs to do. And so just hitting the auto key, and that's the takeaway point here, I think, can often do magic for your images. For example, this image, when I click on auto, I think one of the things that was lacking was that it was too flat. It was lacking in contrast, right? So clicking auto, what it did was it brought down the blacks considerably, which increases the contrast. And then it also brought up the shadows a bit. And so this gets me already quite far in my editing, because right now the background is really almost the way I want it. It was a little bit too bright, now it's good. Also, I can see a lot more detail in his clothes right now. For me, there are now 3 points that still need to be addressed. And the first is that I'm gonna crop the image because I think I wanna put him nicely on the rule of thirds. So I'm gonna hit the R key, and that's the shortcut for crop. And I'll just bring in this slightly and really position it like this. By the way, if you hit the O key while in the crop, you can alternate between different crop modes. So for example, this is Fibonacci's rule. If you're into Dan Brown, you can do this. But I just like the good old-fashioned rule of thirds. And I have yet to see the first image that cannot be, that isn't improved by applying, you know, the basic rule of thirds. Look at how much we improved the image with this one little bit of cropping. Now, another thing I want to do is, I don't know about you guys, but I think I love a green background, but too much can be too much. I mean, the green here is so bright and so vivid and so that it's distracting from my subject. And we don't want that. If this were a landscape image, perfect. But this is a portrait image. So I want to focus on the man, not on the background. So I want to desaturate the background. And this goes again to my 80-20 idea of working. Whenever we don't have the time, but whenever I would ask this in like a Lightroom course, I would ask people, how would you you know, take away the saturation on the background? A lot of people would say, well, you know, you use the adjustment brush and you set the saturation to a negative value and you just paint over the background. That's a valid option, I would say it's effective, but it's not the most efficient option. Because whenever I can, I will do a local task, like taking away the saturation in this background, but I will do it in a with a global control, because that way I can not only do it a lot quicker, but I can also copy and paste this setting on maybe 12 other images that I have of the same guy, but him maybe being on the left, in the middle, wherever, you know? Whereas if I were to do this with a brush adjustment, I would have to brush it in each and every image separately. So this is where I want to introduce you to my, probably the best, my most favorite Lightroom panel, which is the HSL color panel. You can do a million things in here. For example, because it breaks down color in its three core components, which is the actual color or the hue, the saturation, how much of the color there is, and then the luminance, or how bright or how dark the color is. So in this case, because there's only green in the background, the simplest way for me to remove that green is to go to the saturation tab of the HSL panel and to just drag the green slider to the left. And as you can see, without any brushing, I can really take away the saturation of that green. And even I could, you know, turn down its brightness too, if I want to, and I don't really want to. But now this image is a lot more about our Sadhu here, right? Just by this one control. And if I wanted to, I could synchronize this with a dozen other images, and it would automatically do the same wherever that green would be. Now, the only drawback of this system is that suppose he was wearing a green turban, then obviously the turban would be desaturated too. So then that wouldn't work, and then I would have to brush it. But whenever he's not, I can do it this way. So this already improves my image a lot. Now, the last thing I want to do is brighten his face a little bit. And for that, I will, you know, I can use the adjustment brush, but I touch upon that really extensively in the actual 2.5-hour course. So let me show you another way, which is the radial filter. And that's this one here. And the thing is, by default, and I really don't understand that, by default, the radial filter is set to whenever you apply it. So basically, I want to bring up the exposure a bit. So I'll already set that. There's two ways to working with this. You can already set it and then draw the radial filter, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. I just like to do this because this helps me to determine where I have to draw this. I can always change this later. So by default, as you can see, this filter is set up to actually change the outside, which I don't understand at all, but that's how it is. Now, let me give you a tip. If like me, you most of the time, you want your radial filters to affect the inside, you don't always want to hit the invert checkbox. So the trick is that to change this order, you just click on the radial filter, and before drawing one, you hit the invert checkbox. And from now on, every new radial filter that you draw, until you change this again, will affect the inside, which is what I like a lot more. So I can click and drag here, and look, you know, I can simply brighten his face really easily just by adding this. And now it's a bit too much, but obviously I can scale this back because this is all non-destructive, right? So I can do something like this. And now maybe let me zoom into one-on-one. I maybe still want to brighten his eyes a little bit more separately. So what I'll do is I'll add a new radial filter. I click on the new button. I'll drag one over his eyes. Maybe in this case, I won't use the exposure. So I'll double click to reset that, but I'll use the shadow slider to subtly bring that up a bit, you know. Might even add a little bit of clarity to focus a little bit more. Now what clarity will often do is it will also darken it a little bit more. So I need to maybe up the exposure a bit again, like this. maybe increase the whites of the eyes a bit more too, like this. And then when I'm happy with my setting, I can just Command Option on a Mac or Control Option on Windows, click and drag to duplicate this to the other side. You see? And so now with a couple of small changes, I've actually finished editing this image, right? Now, and this is what I would call a, just a corrective edit. What I can do now is, if I want to, I can add mood to the image. And for that, as I mentioned, I like to work with presets. And for example, I'll show you the effect of some of these are actually presets you can download for free if you subscribe to the newsletter. You can find the URL up here. And as you can see, these are way past, just simple tonal corrections. These really change the mood of the image. And based on, what I want the image to tell, I can use either one of those, but they don't really change the actual brightness or anything, because that's just how this works. Now, the thing is, and this allows me to touch a little bit upon the difference between presets and profiles. For example, I have this here, the Moody Browns preset. What this will do is it will actually, a preset, we actually created one at the start of this webinar, remember, where we changed, two settings and then we turned it into a preset. So this is just a very complex version of that. What this does is it changes, for example, it changes the tone curve. It's changed the HSL color panel dramatically. So, and that's the thing with presets, it has probably also overwritten my previous change that I did to the background in terms of saturation. So that's the downside of a preset. A preset will always override any existing settings. Now, for example, it adds a split tone. So this is a very complex thing, and you can apply this in one go, right? So that's the beauty about preset. It completely changes the look of the image. Now, let's compare that, because I also have the same look as a profile, and this is something that only Lightroom Classic users have access to. Lightroom 6 users unfortunately don't. And you can find these in the same section where you could find the camera matching profiles, with the difference that they are under those camera matching profiles they are the so-called creative profiles. And Lightroom actually ships with a couple of them, these four here. But for example, this is one from my own pack, and this is the same one, Moody Browns. And as you can see, we have more or less the same look as we did, but the difference is that this, apart from the settings that I already changed, this doesn't change, actually let me, so this doesn't change any of the other settings. And the beauty is that I have an amount slider with which I can dial back or even dial up, if I want to go really overboard, the effect of the profile. So for me, the profiles, they are the new, basically they are the presets of the 21st century, so to speak. And as I said, Lightroom comes with a couple of them. And you also, if you buy the course, you get a set of 10 profiles thrown in just because we like you.
On that note, Pete.
Yeah.
I
could go on forever, but
yeah. We're not going to have any time for the Q&A if we don't move on.
Okay. So let me shut up until the Q&A then. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's a few questions out there that haven't been answered. I figured some of them weren't. Some of them were a little bit on your topic. Some of them were off topic. So we're going to have some time for a Q&A in a minute.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do now is to...
So I shall stop sharing my screen, I guess, for the moment.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's how we do that.
Yeah. There you go.
I was wondering what was going on there. Okay, just one second. So, all right, so Pete mentioned you get the profiles in the course. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about Pete's course. It's Learn Lightroom Classic CC in 2.5 hours. So basically what do you get in the course? You get a bunch of videos, which you can see here on the left. These are just some of the videos. They're not all the videos, they're the videos, but you also get exercise files and you get a PDF. So you get the course, and then you also are able to download their MP4 video files. So you download them, you own them, and then you can watch them on whatever device that you want, your phone, tablet, laptop, Mac, or Windows, whichever. As Pete was mentioning earlier, you get also, in addition, you get the bonus pack is added into the course. You get his 10 creative profiles, which he was just showing you. Gerard says that the course was immediately applicable and a really coherent explanation about the software. Mary said Pete's teaching is a fluent way of teaching with lots of super handy tips you seldom see on other blogs. And I'll second that. I'm actually a subscriber of Pete's newsletter myself, and often in every newsletter, he sends out one little tip, and every time I read it, I'm like, I never heard of that. So I definitely like hearing his tips, because like she says, they're ones that you seldom see or never see anywhere else. So what do you get? 16 downloadable videos. It's 150 minutes in total. There's 7 bonus videos. It's all up to date with the latest version of Lightroom Classic. So there were just some new updates recently. So Pete updated this whole course so that it is totally up to date. You're learning the latest and greatest things that have come out with Lightroom CC. You get the 10 creative profiles bonus pack. There's also a 15-day money-back guarantee. So there is a special offer we're having, which is just for the people who are watching this webinar. It is for the next 48 hours, and that's only 48 hours for the people in this webinar. It's $59.96. That's 25% off. It's normally $79.95. Also, we're having a kind of little last minute fast action bonus, we call it, where if you purchase the course within 15 minutes of the end of this webinar, not 15 minutes from now, but 15 minutes from the end of this webinar, you will get a 1-hour live group Q&A session with Pete and I, and that will be next week. And it will also take place in Zoom, like we're doing right now, but it'll be obviously smaller and with a more one-to-one, not one-to-one, but a small group interaction.
Unless everybody buys the course, obviously.
Every single person buys the course. Next, we're going to move on to the Q&A. If you want to go ahead and purchase the course, you can go to the link below, bit.ly/learn Lightroom now. And I'm actually going to put a link. I'm going to embed that link into the chat, so you can just click on that if you want. So let's go into, we're going to do some giveaway. We have a giveaway. We're going to give away 3 of Pete's Lightroom preset packs.
Yeah.
And we're going to give away that in a minute. However, I want to give everyone a chance for some Q&A. You can ask about the course, or you can ask questions about what Pete talked about today. And I'm just going to start by sharing with Pete a few of the questions that I saw. So Pete, we have...
So I'll switch back to my screen, right?
Okay. We have yeah.
Okay.
We have a question from Pete. We have to ask him first because he has, or answer his question first because he has the same name as us. Pete asks about the auto button. Before, you were saying that the auto button is really excellent now, or much better than it was in the past. When you do click on the auto button, what's the best way to undo that? Would you just do a Command Z or undo everything?
Well, you could do Command Z, you know, let me just, for example, here, if I do auto, and if I do Command Z, then it will, but that just undoes the last thing you did. So suppose that you want to undo it after you, for example, added a vignette, you know, then Command Z would undo the vignette, and I would have to do Command Z twice, but then I would lose my vignette. So what you could also do is, you know, if you Option click on tone, this will turn into, or Alt click on Windows, this will turn into reset tone, and this will reset everything of this particular section. And the same goes for presence. If you Option click on presence, it will reset all the presence sliders. So that's this little shortcut. Another thing you could do is, for example, suppose you like what auto does, but you don't particularly like what it did to the highlights. You can just double click either on the slider itself or on the word, and this will just reset that particular slider. So you can use auto to get into the ballpark, and then double click on any slider you don't like the effect of to negate that slider's contribution to the overall effect. And that's why I kind of like auto, because it also, if you're starting out with Lightroom, it kind of teaches you for a specific image what, you know, what sliders you should tweak in which sections in order to improve your image.
The next question is from Salinder. He asks, how much editing should one do? What is the ratio so the pictures are not altered too much? Is there any rule?
I think you're asking the wrong person, because I do, I mean, it depends on, like with this image where we were, let me go. The nice thing, by the way, about Lightroom is that, and that's something you don't have in Camera Raw, is that you have this complete history of things. So you can always, you know, backtrack and everything. So for example, for this image, I would say that this is what I would call a normal edit. However, what I like most about Lightroom is, and that's actually a quote by David Allen Harvey. So he says you should shoot what it feels like, not shoot what it looks like. And I think the same applies to processing. You should process what it felt like, or what it makes you feel like, or what you want actually your viewer to feel like, and not necessarily a neutral way of looking at things. So that's why, for example, this is very neutral, but I like the image a lot more with this setting, and this is, but this is a purely creative choice, you know? This is me wanting this image to look a little bit more faded, a little bit more warm, and that, there you can go as far as you want. But to me, that's the real, you know, what also gives you a particular style. I sometimes hear, like, for example, this image, the original is actually looks like this, but I wanted the image to be a lot more moody and a lot more, you know, dramatic. So I edited it this way. And that's the beauty in Lightroom. You can do this, and tomorrow I make a virtual copy. By the way, a virtual copy is just a different version of the same image without taking up additional file size space. And I can reset that, and I can edit this one this way, you know? And there's no right or wrong. It's just, what do I want the viewer to feel? Is this, for example, for an article about, like I did on your blog about, you know, the new dam menacing these tribes here, then I might prefer this colder look, because it's a little bit more a look of despair. Whereas if it's a more upbeat article, I might choose this editing, because this looks, although it's still slightly menacing with the gun and everything, but this looks slightly more positive than this one. I mean, it's all about the feeling, right? So one last thing about that, sometimes you just need to edit an image because you completely screwed up during capture. For example, and this is actually a nice example, and maybe we can do a before and after of this in another webinar someday, but this was all edited in Lightroom, but I'm actually afraid to show you the before image because you will all think I'm a really bad photographer. So this is the before image, right? So my flashes were off. So instead of the light hitting my subject, it hit this part, but it was dark. It was the last 5 minutes of the day. So, I mean, I have all kinds of excuses, but Lightroom let me turn this into this completely different thing. And this took quite some time, but again, I mean, I could do it all in Lightroom. So that's a very long-winded answer to a very simple question.
We have about 5 minutes left. I want to ask a few more questions. We'll do the giveaway because that'll be at the 1 hour mark because I know people have got to get on with their day. And then we'll actually, if people want to stay on, and if you are, I'm happy to answer a few more questions. But let's get, so in 5 minutes, we'll do the giveaway. Next question is from Saul is, how is a catalog from Lightroom 6 imported into Lightroom Classic CC? Now, this is good. Yeah, one thing I wanted to tell everyone is that we've been focusing a lot on how to edit photos here, exactly. But a whole other side of the course, and really what I like most or find most helpful about Lightroom is the fact that it acts as like a filing cabinet to organize all your images. And we didn't even touch on that, and that's a huge part of your course is your workflow and how you import and store. So anyways, I don't know how you want to answer this, but we only have a few more minutes.
That's really important because I think, you know, you cannot screw up with your edits. I mean, you can do something that other people won't like, but that's it. You cannot ruin your images by editing them because it's all non-destructive. What you can screw up a lot is the actual library aspect of Lightroom, and that's why I go into a lot of depth in the course about, you know, I give you strategies to avoid the typical pitfalls that self-taught Lightroom users often fall into. But to answer the actual question, you don't even have to import it because if you install Lightroom Classic CC, so make sure that it is Lightroom Classic CC because Adobe, they really mess things up when they, with their naming of Lightroom. So it's Lightroom Classic CC. If you install that and the first time you open it, normally it should detect your Lightroom 6 catalog, and it will prompt you to upgrade the catalog. And that's all you need to do. You just follow that upgrade prompt, and it will upgrade your catalog for you. And it's basically going to be the same name, but it's going to have, normally it's going to have a -2 attached to it. And then from there on, you just continue with that catalog. So there's no need to import anything. If for some reason it wouldn't automatically open your old Lightroom 6 catalog, then you just choose File, Open Catalog, and you navigate to wherever your old Lightroom 6 catalog is. Generally, it's in a folder called Lightroom in your Pictures folder, and you would open that catalog and it will give you the same upgrade prompt, and you just hit upgrade and you're good to go.
Okay, I am putting right now a link to the course for the full page to all the course info. I just put that into the chat room. If people are interested in purchasing the course, they can click on that link and get more info there of how to do that. Next, I want to do the giveaway. We have 3 Lightroom preset packs to give away. So we're going to give away those. And then after, if there's actually 2 more questions, we'll do 2 more questions after that. But just to respect everybody's time here. Can you give me a number, Pete, between 1 and 8? three numbers between 1 and 8.
Okay, 3, 5, and 8.
3, 5, and 8. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go into the Q&A. Whoops, how do we do this? Q&A. Okay, here we go. Q&A. I'm going to just say the order in the people of which have asked questions. So the third person to ask a question was Brian Scanlon. You're a winner of the preset pack. That's the third. Fourth, fifth is Sol Seinberg. What were the three numbers?
8.
And 8. And 8 is Pete Stoll, number 8. So those are the three winners. You can email Pete for him to send you the preset packs. I will put his email in the chat box. So
Okay.
we have a couple more questions. One is from Richard Bates. Any tips on culling and rating photos in Lightroom upon import?
Yes, don't. I mean, I touch on that in more detail in the actual course, but the actual import window for me isn't meant to do your culling. It's a lot faster and a lot more flexible to just import everything and then do your culling in the library module, especially in Lightroom Classic, where we now have a new, because the big downside to this used to be that it could take Lightroom quite some time to show you a one-on-one preview. And after all, you often want a one-on-one preview to see if your image is sharp. So it could take, for example, for my GFX, it could take up until 10 seconds per image for me, waiting until I had a sharp preview. But now with the workflow I explain in the course, which is the embedded preview workflow, it uses the previews that you have in your files or next to your files anyway, if you shoot RAW plus JPEG. And so it gives you a very quick, if not instantaneous preview. And so that's why it's a lot better to cull your images once they're inside of Lightroom, and then the bad ones you just give an X, as in reject, and then you throw them out again. And that's a lot faster. It's either that or use a dedicated app as Photo Mechanic. But ever since we have the new embedded preview workflow, I just work like that, and it works like a charm.
Okay. We have another question here. Before I get to that question, though, I'm just curious. Iris asks, so do you import both the RAW file and the JPEG?
Yes, I have set my camera up to shoot RAW plus large JPEG, and I store both on the same card. And then I have set Lightroom up to not use the JPEGs and the RAWs as separate files, because I don't want to have twice the work. But so Lightroom will import all the images from the card. It will just show me the RAWs, but the JPEGs will wind up in the same folder as the RAWs. Lightroom knows about them. It doesn't show me them, but it uses the JPEGs as previews so that I can quickly go through my images and cull in the library module. So that's the executive summary of the procedure. But I think I have a 15-minute video on the whole thing, because there is also a difference if you're shooting mirrorless versus DSLR and everything. And so I cover that really extensively in the actual course.
Okay. We'll have some more questions. Before I get to that, though, a little public service announcement. We would really appreciate your feedback just in the chat. I'm curious if you all found this helpful, if you enjoyed it. Just please share your thoughts. We'd appreciate that. So next question is, so a couple of people are asking, do you convert, Richard wants to know, do you convert to DNG?
No. The reason that I don't is that although it's an open format in the sense that it's publicly documented and everything, it's also, I mean, not every RAW converter supports it. So it means that you're limiting your options in a sense, because you can always convert from RAW to DNG, but you cannot go back unless you incorporate your original RAW in the DNG, but then your file gets twice as big. So for that reason, I don't. Now, there's a lot of advantages to DNG, but I have another very specific reason why I don't, and that's because I have a cloud backup of my images. And that means that I also, and that's a bit technical, but I also have Lightroom set up to write everything I do, every edit. So every edit I've been doing for the past hour not only gets saved in my Lightroom catalog, but it also gets saved as a little XMP file next to my RAW file, which is like an extra backup of my settings if ever something goes wrong with the catalog, of which I have 3 backups anyway, but just, I mean, it's just an extra safety. Now, the problem is that with the DNG, that XMP, that information is written inside of the DNG. So that means the smallest edit I do to an image, my online backup system has to upload the entire image back to the cloud. Might be a 50 megabyte image. Whereas if I'm working just with RAWs and I upload and I do an edit to an image, it only has to upload the small XMP text file to the cloud, which is 5 or 10 or 15 kilobytes. So it puts a lot less strain on my internet traffic. That's a very practical reason, but it's nevertheless an important one.
Joan asks, do you import directly from the memory card, or do you download to an external hard drive and then import into Lightroom? I think this is something you go over in the course, right?
Yeah, again, I mean, and not to cheap out of the, or to I mean, to dodge the question or anything, but I do cover that in detail in the course, because there's actually 2 ways. In the actual course, I teach the second way, which is, in my experience, if something goes wrong with beginning Lightroom users, it's usually in the import, because that's sometimes, especially for beginners, kind of difficult to wrap their heads around. So that's why in the basic course, in the 2.5 hours, I teach what I consider to be the most fail-safe method, and that is to copy your images first to an external drive and then import them from there as they are, where they are. Now, it's just an extra step, and that's why in the bonus videos, I have 7, I think, bonus videos in total 1 hour, I cover the slightly more advanced, slightly more professional way, which is to copy them directly from the memory card using Lightroom. So, I mean, either way, it's covered in the video, and I don't think one is wrong, or it's just one is faster than the other. And if you explain, if you explain it well, like I hope I do in the course, there's actually no risk in trying the faster way, because I do point out that is one thing that you have to watch out for, where most of the people get it wrong, and that's I specifically point out in the course to tell you, hey, watch out that you don't do this, because otherwise you'll screw up. So yeah, both are valid.
So we only have a few more minutes. We'll just get to maybe 2 more questions. Next one is from Pete Stoll. He asks, regarding lens profiles, I'm switching lenses sometimes in the same shoot. How can I sort them, then apply the corrections? It's the sorting that's getting me here.
You don't have to. You can, in Lightroom's filter bar, you can sort by lens, for example. But the thing is, for example, remember I created a preset based on this image, which was the 16 to 35. Now, for example, this image was shot with the 85mm, and if I were to apply that preset, because I can not only apply it upon import, but I can also apply it later on. So I have this here. If I apply this one, well, if I go into the, you see the image changed, so that means it did something. So if I go into my lens corrections panel, you'll see that now, oops, that's not what it should be. For some reason, it, wait, this is not good. This is a bug, actually. What it should do is it should use the actual lens that was used with this camera, because that's the way it should be. I don't know what's happening here that it doesn't. Let me try this one here, but I think I have a okay, I think I have an email to write tonight, because that's definitely not how this should work. Normally, what needs to be done is, if you use if you create a preset, is that it doesn't retain the actual lens used, but the preset just tells Lightroom to check whichever lens was used and then apply the correction profile for that lens to that particular image. Now, because I haven't used my DSLRs in such a long time, it's the first time I noticed that this no longer happens. I mean, so everybody should just buy mirrorless cameras, basically, and then we wouldn't have this problem. You see, if I apply this manually here, then it does indeed, it picks the right lens. So really I have to file a bug report and check why this isn't working as it's expected. But anyway, well, to answer that question, if you want to do it, if you have the same bug, and I mean, probably you should, if you have the same bug, then the way to filter your images is to go into, basically, for example, you would just go into your recent shoot, right? So suppose that this is my recent shoot, right? Then I would choose, in the library model, I would choose View, Show Filter Bar, right? Then I would click on Metadata, and then in the first column here, I can change this to focal length, lens. And then here, I would have a breakdown of all the lenses used, right? And then I could apply that particular, I could switch to the develop module and apply that. But normally, as I said, there should be no need to do this, because it should happen automatically, taking the specific lens into account. So I'll check that, and I'll, if I get feedback, I'll let you guys know, because this is a really important thing, obviously.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it for now.
Okay.
There are 4 people who bought the course, but I can't see their names, actually. I think you can see that, Pete. But anyways, congratulations to the 4 people who bought the course so far. And
there's still, the 15 minutes are starting only now. So if,
yeah, the 15 minutes, yeah. The 15 minutes are starting now, so if you purchase within the next 15 minutes, you'll also get, as an added bonus, a 1-hour live session, Q&A session with us next week to answer any and all of your questions. And of course, we couldn't get to everyone's question today, but if you do have a question, you can send it to Pete or myself. We want to thank you again for your time and for joining us this evening or this morning, wherever you are in the world.
So maybe I just want to add, so about the course, I obviously, I've taught Lightroom for 10 years now. So I think what sets this course apart from a lot of other courses is that I actually know where people tend to make mistakes, because I've taught it to a lot of live audiences. And so I know where people get stuff wrong. And that's probably the difference between we and many of the other teachers who only, you know, create a Lightroom course but who don't have the teaching experience, is that they don't really know where the pain points are. So they might focus on stuff that's actually pretty easy to learn yourself. That's pretty foolproof, and they might skim a bit quicker on the important topics. Also, I wanted to add that if you feel like you've learned something in this webinar, which was only an hour basically, imagine what you can learn in the full 3.5 hours, because it's basically 2.5 hours plus an hour of bonus stuff. So and an hour of extra webinar next week if you buy within the next 15 minutes. So I mean, that's the end of my sermon, but I also wanted to thank you guys. This was our first joint webinar, but I really think we got a good flow here. So I definitely, if it's up to me, I want to do some more. Yeah. And you'll hear about those in the future.
One thing I wanted to add is a couple people who are on the webinar today have already purchased your course, or a few have already purchased your course. And I told them that they could join the 1 hour Q&A next
obviously,
week. But that is only for the people who spent the time here and attended the webinar.
Exactly.
So if you did that, please send an email to Pete. I think it's Pete at morethanwords.
No, it's info@morethanwords.be. Or Pete
that
also
in the
works.
Chat.
But,
info@morethanwords.be.
Yeah.
I just put that in the chat, and there's also the link to the chat. Oh, one last question that just popped into my head. Somebody asked, is there a way to, where's the link to buy? The link to buy is in the...
That's the most important link.
I put it in there, but people keep commenting, and then it keeps rising up into the...
We should auto post this every 5 questions.
I'm going to post it again. I just put the link in the chat right now. Whoops, it's below his email. Somebody asked about shortcuts. Is there a thing in Lightroom where you can find all the shortcuts? And my answer is I know that they have one on the Adobe site. I think there's a page with all of the shortcuts. There's also an overlay you can buy. Like little
That's what I want to show. You have, if you go to the per module, if you go to help, you have the library module shortcuts if you're in the library module. And so it will, these are not all of them, but it's a lot of them. And quite frankly, it's a lot more than the ones that I ever use. But and then if you were in develop, sorry?
I'm laughing because I'm learning something too. I never knew that.
So in develop, if you do help, you have develop module shortcuts. Now, honestly, what I do is I have programmed a couple of these on my Wacom tablet, but for the most part, I use the really basic ones, like the G for grid and the D for develop, and then but for example, just to give you an idea how far you can take this, there's actually software that you can, or add-ons that you can purchase. Like I haven't installed it yet, but I've bought a MIDI panel, which is like just 64 buttons basically in an 8x8 grid. And if you want to, you can map that to 64 presets. But then you need an external plugin, which is called LR Control. And it's like $20. So that's one of the nice things about Lightroom, that maybe we should even do a webinar one day about Lightroom plugins, because there's so many cool Lightroom plugins out there. And if you want, then you can just, program just about anything You could, for example, if you have a MIDI panel with dials, you can actually put your exposure slider on a dial, for example. So there's loads of cool things you can do thanks to the plugin architecture of Lightroom. But that's a whole different webinar, I'm afraid.
Okay, I think that's about it. Iris said she's trying to purchase, but the card not acknowledged. I just popped in Pete's email again into the chat.
Oh, I thought you popped in my credit card. No.
Okay, everyone. I think that's about it. Bill asked, "Where's the link to buy?" The link to buy is in the chat there. That's about it. Your link isn't live, so I copied and pasted it to a new window. Joan says, "Okay, I didn't know. I thought the links were live." Joan says that she pasted it to a new window. It's asking for a discount code.
No, there is no need for a discount code because the price is already...
the discount is already applied at
so
at
it should
checkout.
say $59.96. And like in 2 days, it'll go back up to the original price of $79.95. We expressly didn't do the discount code thing because then people forget to enter the discount code and it just, it creates for an unhappy experience, which is why we just gave the price without, immediately after the discount.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much. The 15 minutes for the fast acting bonus starts now, which is the 1 hour live Q&A for next week. That starts right now. But anyways, the price is still discounted for the next 48 hours. So thank you very much for joining our webinar. We appreciate that you could make it. And I don't know about you, Pete, but I really enjoyed it. So
Me too. It was
definitely do this again.
Thank you for hosting this so excellently and eloquently.
Okay, everyone. Have a great day or evening wherever you are.
Thank you.
All right.
And bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.